want to explore the paradigm of system design, and I like to do it through the Harry Potter movies simply because, or the Harry Potter narrative simply because it's easier to see things outside of ourselves than within. And it's important to understand that within the ecology of human imagination, there's often more truth in things that are called fiction than there is in, quote, real life. Because when you deal with, quote, real life, you're dealing with a lot of politics. But when you're dealing with fiction, there is less attachment on the part of both the author and the reader, and there's no pushback from the characters to distort the data set. And so the first thing to understand is that energy is by its nature graceful. And so one way to look at this is that the universe is perfectly symmetrical, perfectly balanced, and graceful, and moving on a steady, complex evolutionary path, except for the human condition. That somehow the symmetry, which is often expressed in the sphere or the circle as the most graceful shape. Just think of the shape of a wheel. Why do we have bicycle wheels? It's because they transport people more efficiently than squares or triangles or hexagons or pentagon, anything like that. The wheel, the circle, the sphere, is the most elegant shape known to consciousness in the process of life, which is always a process of movement. If you want to move something heavy in a graceful way, you want that heavy object to be spherical because it takes less energy to move a sphere, from left to right or forward to back, etc., than it does to tip a square all the way up on its edge and, collapse it down, etc. So, when you're dealing with, I just watched the new advertisement by Ford, who's paired up with Rivian, to see an electric pickup tow 120 tons, I think it was. The reason it can, it was 1 million tons, 1 million tons. The reason that a single pickup can tow 1 million tons is that it's on tracks with spherical wheels. And so it takes very little energy to move that forward versus square wheels where it wouldn't even been able to move 100 tons. Now, the next thing to understand is that the reason we experience so much suffering in human consciousness is that what's being evolved is not the symmetry of the universe. What's being evolved is the complexity and quality of human consciousness to interact with that symmetry. And so as human consciousness is collapsed through language, the circle and the sphere is collapsed from an infinite number of lines. And that's, the beauty of the sphere is that, in quantum mechanics, where you get down to that subatomic level, where if you look through one set of eyes, you see a particle. And if you look through another set of eyes, you see a wave. And so when you get down to the level of the sphere, it is paradoxically an infinite number of lines and a single unit. So in one shape you have infinity and you have one. You have an infinite number of distinctions and you have no distinction. It's all one. This is the power, the grace, the symmetry, the mystery of the circle and the sphere. Well, in that symmetry and that grace, outside of human consciousness, you have perfection. As it comes within human consciousness, we break things down. At the most crude level, we cut the sphere in half into duality, into yin and yang, into good and bad, into positive and negative, into up and down, left and right. We break the sphere in half within a dualistic paradigm. And this is, in many ways, the beginning of suffering in the metaphors. In the metaphors of the knowledge of good and evil, one could say that the eating of the fruit is going from the consciousness that sees the sphere as one into the consciousness that cuts the sphere in half, into a distinction, into a consciousness of duality, good and bad, the knowledge of good and evil. And this knowledge, all human knowledge, occurs through language. All human consciousness occurs through language. Because there's never been a thought, a conscious thought, or a conscious feeling that has not been seen through the lens of language. And while the sphere may be an infinite number of lines, our vocabulary, our paradigms, our lenses to look at that infinity are incredibly simple, incredibly crude. The typical human mind has a hard time remembering more than 10 digits. You know, you spout out a 10-digit phone number, and the average person isn't going to be able to hold on to more than maybe 4 digits. And with a little practice, they can remember and group and stuff. But, you know, you give someone a 20-digit number and say, here it is, feed it back to me. It's hard. And so the sphere is collapsed down to a set of distinctions that the human ego is capable of relating to through language. And it is in many ways the crudeness of those distinctions that create the difference between a symmetrical and graceful journey and a clunky journey. Because surely when we take this wheel and divide it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different distinctions, the distinctions that we'll be using in terms of for the roles in this particular story, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 the different distinctions of overlays on those roles. We're dealing with something pretty crude, something far away from infinite. And as you turn a wheel into a square and then drive forward, it's a clunky ride. And the idea in the evolution of human consciousness is that as you bang every single point of the way in that square, it's going to be so painful that you're going to knock the edges off the square. Now you've got an 8-sided shape, and the bangs of moving forward are half as intense, or half as violent. And you shave a bit off of each of those. Now you've got a 16-sided sense of, you've got a 16-sided paradigm, a 16 set of, a set of 16 distinctions. So again, it's moving towards graceful. With every one of those distinctions, as we move towards complexity, we move towards grace. There's nothing more complex than infinite. So no energy, we know in physics, is created or destroyed. It's simply run through different systems, different mathematical formulas. And as you, for example, divide a circle in half, then take the half that you've divided here, further subdivide it, amplify certain things, run certain energy through that system, and then reconnect with the other half, you get a different mathematical equation than if you never break the circle down to begin with. And much like the hero's journey, much like any journey, in that poem, to arrive back at the place that we began and know it for the first time, one could say that the entire human experiment is a narrative of going and leaving the unconscious set of infinite distinctions into suffering by forming very simple and crude distinctions. This is good, this is bad. What do? We kill the bad things, we accept the good things. This is a life of intense suffering. We've just taken half of the entire universe and turned it into something bad. Now you've created a battle. It's like, it takes all this energy to flip it this way. Then once you flip things that way, it gets out of balance. So then there's always with every action, there's an equal reaction. We learn that in physics. So you finally flip in your very crude paradigm. Flip, this is bad. We're going to kill it all. We flip over here. Now we've taken a very crude out-breath, but for life to continue, it needs to flip back. Now we have to take an in-breath, and it's hard work. It's struggle. It's suffering. It's hell. It's absolute hell. The cruder the set of distinctions. So no energy is created or destroyed. As energy enters the human system, as source energy comes through the lens of the human ego, it enters a set of distinction. It enters a pattern, a mathematical pattern, the sophistication of which will determine the amount of suffering. And so if we dive into the Harry Potter system, we have the Muggle family role. So this is a system of roles. So we have the Muggle family. Then we have the Wizarding family. And we have the Muggle culture. And we have the Wizarding culture. We have protocols and rules within each culture. We have areas of shame in each culture, that which is not acceptable within the culture. We have children. That's another distinction. The students, the Muggle students, the non-Muggle, the half-Muggle students, etc. We have the paradigms in which they're dealing, a subset of culture. We also have teachers. We have the Hogwarts teachers. We have the parents of the children that are wizarding children. We have the Muggle parents. We have the wizarding parents. And we have the different values, the value hierarchy. We have a value hierarchy. We have the degree of consciousness and unconsciousness, which is, of course, segmented. As a wizard, you're going to learn Aloha Mora, to open a door. As a non-wizard, you're not going to learn that. You're going to learn to apply force in WD-40 and open the door. There's the distinction of how many, of what areas are taboo and what are just unconsciously unconscious, self-referentially biased into oblivion. And within the biology, the psychology of the human condition, we have a hierarchy of human needs. Abraham Maslow, in studies of highly successful people unencumbered by massive amounts of disease, what is the healthy human condition if left to its own devices, whether in China, whether in the past, whether in the United States? And we have the hierarchy of human needs: survival, security of survival, a sense of love and belonging. And these can be seen as rings on a tree because you have survival, keeping the body alive. Security of survival is bigger because it includes survival. You can't be secure in your survival if you're not surviving. And so within the hierarchy of needs, it's like rings of a tree. Survival is at the core. Security of survival is bigger. love and belonging is bigger still. If you are on a planet populated by billions of human beings, one of the best ways to ensure security of survival is the love and belonging expressed in action by other human beings. Because if you love and belong to a group that loves and says that you belong, then by definition, your survival is ensured. Because when we say to a partner, to a spouse, etc., I love you, you belong, and that's real, not just words. We have that distinction, the gap between reality and words, because words are very cheap and can be used to manipulate. But when that's real, what it really means is I'm going to treat your body the same way as I treat my body. When your survival is in jeopardy, I'm going to do something about it because you belong. Versus the sociopathic message, the dissociative message that says, that's not my problem. So that's how you know you don't belong. When you have a problem in your survival and your security, and the people around you say, that's not my problem, you do not belong. And you do not have the benefit of real love within your cult. Real love within your cult ensures that you will survive, and that having survived, you will be secure in that survival, and that you will feel that you belong because of the behavior of those people around you. So you have love and belonging, which is the greatest security for survival and security of survival. Now, then you have self-esteem. I like myself. I like who I am. I like who I'm becoming, etc. And this is an internalized version of love and belonging. Because the things that we really like about ourselves are the things that help us secure love and belonging within our cult. So, for example, efficiency is one of the high deities in the American cult. And so, if you are highly efficient, and competency, so efficiency and competency work together. If you are highly competent and efficient at doing something, you will often get the message that you belong. Now, if you're making a company millions of dollars a year in a capitalist cult, you definitely belong if you're making the company millions of dollars. And they'll express that. You get a corner office. You get, lifetime employment. Everyone bows and looks up. Now, do you think that a company that has identified an employee making them millions of dollars a year, that if that employee gets depressed, it'll be of interest to that CEO? Why are our sales down? Well, our main salesperson is depressed. What do we have to do? Do we have to send them to Tahiti? I asked a CPA on a plane because I was arguing with the IRS myself at the time in an audit, and they didn't want me writing off the taxes of $25,000 of therapy a year, which was what I was spending at the time. And I said to the IRS, no. You don't make a dime unless I make money, because you take half my money. Now, neither of us makes any money if I don't get out of bed in the morning. It's that simple. I am the most valuable asset in this company, because me getting out of bed in the morning and wanting to go to work and having good relationships with my clients is what makes me all of my money, and then you take half of it. So how is it in the IRS's interest to cripple the main asset that's making you guys all this money? Well, the IRS is not known for its empathy and love and belonging. But I asked, one of the top CPAs who I met on a plane who worked for Apple Corporation, I said, what would you do if Steve Jobs, what would you do if the reason Apple stock had plummeted at the time it would have been about $50 billion, because Steve Jobs isn't getting any new ideas. There is no new iPhone. There is no iTunes. There is no iMac because Steve Jobs is depressed. What would Apple do and how would it write it off? And of course, the corporation would hire top trainers and employers. They'd learn about trauma. They'd learn about depression, etc., so that their shareholders could make more money because in a capitalist cult, the top kingpin is the money. And so you will be treated like royalty if you're making people money in this cult. And they'd be able to write it off as a corporation, but as a small business owner, as one of the many, absurd distinctions, and this is why I say the suffering comes with how you break a cult's distinctions down. If you say that a $50 billion company or a $100 billion company can hire top coaches and therapists, etc., to keep its people at its best because that's what makes billions of dollars for the shareholders. But a small business owner is asked to commit suicide and lose the entire country, all of their future earnings and all the tax revenue, if that person, because there's a distinction that we treat big companies differently than little companies. That's insane. That's the kind of ways that you break a circle down into bits and say, no, big companies get treated intelligently, small companies get treated unintelligently. You've just divided the economy into a distinction that has set half of it up to fail in a country that relies more on its entrepreneurs, in which you wouldn't even have Apple if Steve Jobs had got depressed when he was sitting in his garage figuring out with Wozniak what to do with this, that, and the other. And so the trouble when you start breaking stuff down in the framework of human consciousness is it's very easy to draw the wrong lines and then say, no, we treat this line differently than this line, and we all fail, but we don't learn the mathematics. We don't learn the mathematics of system design, so we don't get it. The entire company's GNP goes down, but we don't understand why, because we don't correlate. We don't do system design in school. This was the single most important study that I invented in my homeschooling program because it makes sense. Everything in life is a design equation. From how you design your daily routine, how you design your company, your work-life balance, your relationship to finance, everything is an equation. If you don't learn the principles of good design, then you don't have the consciousness to observe what is good design and what is bad design. And within any circle, the Harry Potter movies are a world. They're a circle of their own. Within any circle, you have a system. And energy goes into the system, and at the other side of the system, it spits out what's called a statistic. And this also is, it's in a culture such as our own that emphasizes the individual, we don't make the distinction between a mathematical equation that produces a statistical probability field and individual free will. In other words, we're a culture that sends people to Vegas and then complains when 98% of the people who go to Vegas comes back with less money. Because Vegas is a system. If you place 100 bets in Vegas, at any casino, randomly, 100 bets, let's say $1,000 each. So you send 1,000 people to Vegas. They each place 100 bets in any casino, and for $1,000, and 98% of the people coming out of that system and returning home are going to do so with significant amounts of less money. And if it's 100 bets, most of them will be broke. So that's a system. And in our culture that emphasizes the individual, what we do is we focus on the 2% that come out with winnings, and we ask the other 98%, why can't you be like that? We don't question the system. Now, we do a little bit because Vegas is a simple system. It's a simple system. We all know that 60, 70% is stacked towards the house. So you place 100 bets and you're going to lose good 70% of the time. And so in that system, we would not send a best friend to go to Vegas with $100,000 and say, come back with more money. If you do, you're uneducated. But we do the same thing with more complex systems like the education system. 98% of all people who enter our education system are highly creative, highly motivated, highly present, and highly alive. Only 2% come out that way. And those that make it that far, we try and send them to postgraduate school and this, that, and the other. And the people with the most degrees in our system are statistically more depressed, more unhappy than a typical person who hasn't gone to school. So you have that thing, this bizarre system where don't go to Vegas and make money, but go through the education system, etc. So this is any system. And so we're looking at Harry Potter here. And so we have the Muggle family here. So Harry Potter's Muggle family. They're frightened of the unknown. That's part of the Muggle family dynamic. They don't understand magic, and they don't want to understand magic. And so they punish anyone who exhibits traits that they don't understand. So that's part of that system that ensures that any wizards or anomalous human beings are going to be punished in the Muggle family part of the system, in the role. So basically, their job in the story is to make Harry as miserable as possible and to try and cow him into feeling inferior because they're afraid of his anomalous talent. So that's one part of the system. We have the Muggle family. Then we have the Wizarding family, which, of course, breaks down into several distinctions, one of which says that Muggle-borns are inferior, and so we can see that they're a highly binary system because many of the oldest wizards in the Wizarding family want to divide the entire world into a binary pattern. There are wizards and there are non-wizards, and that should be the way the world is divided. And wizards are important and must be protected. Muggles, on the other hand, should be killed, enslaved, whatever, to help the more important group. And so this is the beginning of all suffering. When you divide human beings into more than two groups, that's the first kind of leaning towards suffering. But the real thing is, once you've done the divide, almost everyone is predisposed to say that one divide is better than the other divide. Whites are better than blacks. Rich people are better than poor people. Young people are better than old people. Muggles are worse than true blood wizards. And the real ones, the true bloods, we're into Nazi Germany now. The real Aryan race, you can they've got a little bit of a Jewish nose. They're still mostly Aryan, so we'll let them live. They'll kill some Jews as penance, or we'll kill some Muggles as penance, to prove our loyalty. But we're really, Hitler himself, Jewish ancestry, attacking what he hated most in the line within himself. And of course, it's an internalized, externalized wound. When you watch all the grown-ups around you treating a certain subgroup better than others, everyone needs the basic hierarchy of human needs: survival, security, love, and belonging. Well, how are you going to survive, feel secure, and have love and belonging if you belong to a group, or if you have a trait that is inferior from the moment you're born? It's out of your control. You were born a Muggle. Well, you're fucked. You're born a woman. You're fucked. And so we have the Wizarding family with their distinction. And what we're looking at is the equation, the statistical equation of the amount of a couple of things at the end. What are we looking at, when we spit out? Well, I'll hold you in suspense for that a little bit longer. But then we have the protocols and rules. Why is it that Harry Potter and his friends, Hermione and Ron, why is it that Harry Potter is consistently out of bounds for doing the most important things in the whole narrative? He's out of bounds with the Muggle family. Then he's out of bounds with the Wizarding family. Then he's out of bounds with Hogwarts. Why is it that the single most important pattern of action from one of the most important characters in the story is consistently breaking rules to do the right thing? Well, this gets into the rules, and the protocols are part of the system. Energy is coming into the system, and rules and protocols are part of the system. Paradigms are part of the system. Now, the thing to understand with human consciousness is it is always wrong. There is not a single human being capable of the level of sophistication of the pre-human consciousness. We don't even have a word. We call it unconsciousness, meaning that which is graceful and symmetrical is unconscious, because by the time we make it conscious, we bring it into view, we do it with the interference pattern of language. We create a word that says color, and then we pay attention to shades of light density. We say that's green and that's blue and this and that and the other. At 256 million colors calculated by a computer, they have not begun to capture the color wheel, which is an infinite gradient of infinite colors. But we can't deal with 200 million 89.1. We can't even tell the distinction. We don't have consciousness that's that developed. So we break it down. Primary colors, pastel colors, they're always changing it. Drives us crazy trying to get a paint chip, and then how's this going to look at big scale and put up in a house and put out a gallon? Oh, that's too green. It looked fine on the chip. Oh my goodness. This is human consciousness, a very low level of processing of a very high level of energy complexity. And we suffer. We suffer. This white, it's like how many types of off-white? It's driving us crazy. Just paint the damn wall, get it over with. We can't, there's too much work to think about all this. So we have protocols and rules. There's also the distinction with the culture of shame. It's a huge variable, because shame is the phenomena of acknowledging a stepping beyond a human-made distinction. In Ireland, a pale is a stone wall. And we have this term like it's beyond the pale, meaning we can't even talk about it. It's so horrible, or it's like it's beyond. It's like it's just, oh my goodness, it's beyond. Beyond what? Our set of distinctions. And the British conquering Ireland didn't like the heathens and their ways of warrioring. Didn't like the psychedelic culture of the pagans. Didn't like multiple gods, and it's just too complicated. So they built a stone wall, and they said inside this here we have civilized people. One God is a man, of course. One God, a nice white man. Law and order. These are the streets. This is the land. The land doesn't belong to itself. It's here. If you step over here, we're going to kill you. And don't do this and don't do that, or you're beyond the pale. That's where that term comes. You should be on the other side of the wall. You don't belong here. Here in cult consciousness. Here where we break things up. So we have shame, the acknowledgement. And it's a traumatic event for a human being who on some part, like 60% of them belonged, and then they suppressed another, 30%. But there's this 10% quadrant of the psyche that keeps coming up into their thoughts, into their minds, and then they did something. They did something beyond the pale, over the distinction. They did something over the distinction, and they are ashamed. Why? Because they're caught outside of cult territory. Mentally, emotionally, physically, don't tell anyone that thought. That's a shameful thought. Don't let anyone know that you have a part of your infinite psyche that exists outside the bounds, beyond the pale. So you have shame. And it is a trauma, because what did they do with witches? Burn them at the stake. What do they do with pagans? Burn them alive. What did they do with the infidels, with this? When you're outside the pale, when you're outside the wall, defined by a given cult, and you're caught there, your family, your friends, everyone around you has to decide whether or not to throw you out of the terrain called love and belonging. Because if you're in the terrain of love and belonging, if someone comes and threatens you, we'll lay down our lives to protect you. If you run out of food, we'll give you food. We will ensure your survival and security if you're inside the pale, if you're inside the line. You're outside the line. You know, women in the Middle East, they get raped, and the line defined by what is a good woman is a virgin. And so she, by defining the line, that if she's not a virgin, the entire family gets thrown out of the cult. It no longer is belong. They're now a lower class family. And so the family will murder the rape survivor for threatening their belonging, and in doing so their survival and security, in a hierarchy of human needs that draws a line that says that the good families have women who haven't been raped. Now, the line doesn't define in Muslim territory that a man who rapes a woman is outside the line. They define it by whether the woman has been raped. And so there's not the ostracization of a man who raped a woman. There's the ostracization of a woman who's been raped. Now, this is just one of millions of examples of crudely drawn lines that do not reflect the underlying symmetry of the wheel. Now, of course, we love finding the absurdities in other cults with their lines, because that reinforces our own line, that we have the good cult and they have the bad cult. We would never, genitally mutilate our girls. We genitally mutilate our boys, and then elevate it into a high health fact of circumcision. We just do it at infancy. But those horrible African tribes that cut off the female clitoris, horrible, because they're part of the other line. They're on the other side of the divide. So the thing to be aware of is that the introduction of heuristic lines, an abbreviation of the circle crudely rendered so that we can fit it into language that makes sense, is the source of all suffering. However, there is a gradient on the continuum of suffering. And there's a couple of ways to measure the efficiency of a system, so we'll look at that. One is intelligence. Intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. Now, a wheel, for example, if we're looking at the intelligence of a bicycle designer, you're going to see this because we love weirdness and novelty, but someone who designs a wheel to be 24-sided rather than circular is going to experience bumps. They're going to spend more energy to feel worse than the person with a completely symmetrical wheel. And so we would say that that bicycle designer is less intelligent. They don't understand the geometry of mass. They don't understand physics. And therefore, seeing that this is a culture that likes to have everyone look cool by being different, they've designed 24-sided wheels rather than infinitely circular wheels. As a result, those people pedaling along are spending more energy to have more pain. Bump, 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 24 times per revolution. It's not fun. That's why we fix our flat tires. Everything bumps a lot more when we get rid of the rubber. So some systems are intelligent. And a system that is a cult system has to be measured by the statistics of the cult. A system that is a family system has to be measured by the statistics of a family. For example, very high trauma levels in 100% of my 5 siblings. It's a very poorly designed family. It's a bad family system, or it's a low intelligent family system, because massive amounts of depression, suicidal this, pain here, exhaustion, this and that, the other. And it's not an accident. And that's one of the reasons why intelligence is correlated to consciousness. So the second thing is data gathering and measurement. A system that includes self-analysis, meaning system analysis, not the analysis of the individual, because that's how the system protects itself. The system spits out dysfunctional people and then tells them to examine themselves, but never look at the system. The parents spit out dysfunctional children and say, gosh, you're really fucked up. I don't know how. Had nothing to do with me. Didn't have anything to do with dropping you, shouting at you, giving you confusing messages, modeling this, saying that, driving you insane here. No, there's nothing to do. You're just really fucked up. In fact, you're so fucked up, you're fucking up our lives. If we hadn't had the misfortune of being compelled by superhuman beings to have children, we for some reason the condom would always fall off. We took the birth control. Nothing we could do. It was fate. We were cursed by these children. We had no control. And here you came and ruined our lives. And, and this. So when you have data gathering and measurement with symmetry of ownership is another metric on this system. So you have intelligence, the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. So you have a battery, right? Well, how would you rate a battery designer where you have one AA battery that lasts 20% of the other AA battery? So they both weigh the same. They both cost the same. They both used a lot of natural resources. They both cost the same to ship. There they are. You stick it in. One brand of AA battery lasts 10 hours and the other lasts 2 hours. Well, we're dealing with the intelligence of the designer. Now, that's if we're measuring the designer. In a cult that measures money, you might say this is highly intelligent because in the short term, you have to buy new batteries until you figure out that the other company gives you 5 times more power for just about the same price, and nobody buys the old battery. That company goes broke. And now a more intelligent battery designer with more sophisticated chemistry. The Model 3, the Tesla Model 3, when Sandy Munro, one of the leading auto reverse engineers, is breaking the Model 3 apart, they are making batteries with magnetic patterns that are so sophisticated that only the manufacturer can figure out what's going on, and it is more efficient. It's cheaper to build the new Model 3 and electric motor than any other electric motor that's known in any automobile. It's lighter, which is in turn more intelligent. It's cheaper, it's lighter, and it's more energy efficient. So you could say that the designer of the Tesla Model 3 motor maker is the most intelligent designer of electric motors on the planet today. because they're using less natural resources, less money to create more value. That's intelligence. So you don't get that without a feedback loop. Thomas Edison would never have stumbled upon the incandescent light bulb at 10,000, with his 10,000 experiments before one worked without a feedback loop. And so you look at the speed of evolution by the amount and quality of data gathered and measured and responded to. It correlates with intelligence. Symmetry of ownership correlates with intelligence and correlates with evolution. Because when you have half of the circle that says, starving people in Africa, that's not my problem. It's not my problem. That's their problem. My problem is I want to be part of a colonial government and make more money, and child labor and all that's just fine. So we have symmetry of ownership is part of it. Because when you have symmetry of ownership, everyone acknowledges that the statistical suffering coming out from a system is their issue. Everyone at the table wants to talk because everyone at the table owns the statistics. You can measure the sophistication of human consciousness by the degree of symmetrical ownership. Because in the systems where half of the system says, no, it's not my problem, it's not happening, and the system in which every single part at the table says, I have a part to play, they have a part to play, we are all responsible, meaning we all have the ability to respond, and we're all owning it, so we're all willing to respond, and we are all interested in one thing only, the improvement of the end result statistics. You see, because the Tesla Model 3 motor takes the exact same unit of energy into the system, and it puts more torque, more power out than any other motor. It didn't happen at GM, a notoriously dissociated organization where you have management on one side and employees. It's not the employee's problem and it's not the management's problem. It's nobody's problem, so it doesn't improve. So you get excellence in companies with shared ownership, where the stockholders, the end customers, the business owners, the CEO, everyone's working towards the same goal of intelligence, more human well-being per unit of energy consumed. You get rapid innovation. It's an unusual system. Tesla is an unusual system in the systems of the United States automotive history and ecology. And so it's doing better. It's a more intelligent system. Masculine and feminine balance. Now this gets to the core energy within each one of us. The fact that when you do split the universe into two parts, chauvinism says that the masculine is more valuable than the feminine. That doing something is more important than feeling something, for example. That seems common sense to us because we're living in a chauvinistic cult. That the outer world is way more important than the inner world. Something that the Amazonian tribes haven't gathered because they do so much of their work and so much of the sophistication of their culture is in the inner world. They wouldn't get that. But we get that. It's a no-brainer. Of course, I have to make my body look good. It doesn't matter how miserable I am inside. Let me put some makeup on and do a nipple tuck and do this and that and the other. And as long as I look good on the outside, fuck the inside. That's feminine terrain. We don't need it. So the masculine-feminine balance is part of the intelligence of a system. Now, you notice in Harry Potter, there's not a single hour of emotional literacy. The system, called the world of Harry Potter, consists of one emotional torment after the other. Harry Potter is punished for who he is in the Muggle family. Then he's punished for who he is in the Wizarding family. Then, because all the parents are ganging up on him, many of the children in school are ganging up on them as well to get belonging with their own parents. So, of course, it's creating endless amounts of emotional toxicity. Pain, loneliness. If I do this, I break the rules. If I don't do this, I'm dead. It's a continual setup of lose-lose dynamics emotional. And then for some reason, known only to a cult like our own, there is not a single hour of emotional literacy in the entire system. You can go through all 7 books, and there is not a single leadership position or role in the entire system that says, we've got lots and lots of miserable children and miserable adults and violent this and that and the other. Our system has produced someone called Voldemort, who causes all kinds of suffering and all that, presumably because he's very unhappy inside. Happy people don't enjoy hurting other people. So maybe we should talk about feelings. No, that would be too intelligent. That would be too harmonious and balanced between the masculine and feminine. Emotions being feminine terrain, they are, of course, in a chauvinistic system, completely ignored. But they are the main problem in the system because they are ignored, because the science of energy says that whatever you don't see and deal with directly is your enemy because you bang into it. All energy is neither created or destroyed. It's transformed, and it's transformed into something that brings more well-being or less well-being. So we have a poor masculine-feminine balance. The sophistication of distinctions correlates to the sophistication of vocabulary and thinking. You take the typical simplistic cultural paradigm, for example, in our own, where, well, we're dealing with Harry Potter. So what's the goal of every Harry Potter student? They want to pass their OWLs. And I suspect, since it's a British author in England, there are O-levels. And there may even be an OWL or whatever, but there's O-levels, and so in Harry Potter's world, there's OWLs. So we want to get high marks in this. So and what are they? It's all head learning, no emotional learning. Snape, a teacher, has had nothing but torment his entire life, and he's been used, humiliated, bullied, to a point of hatred of a violent intergenerational nature. Why does he hate Harry Potter? Because Harry Potter's dad humiliates him. Why does he hate Harry Potter? Because Harry Potter's mother, what are those? They're feelings. They're feminine terrain. In other words, the entire story within Hogwarts changes as soon as you introduce emotional literacy. As soon as you introduce sharing circles where Snape gets to talk about and cry about how horrible it was, how lonely he is without a love of his life, why it is that everyone hates him and blah, blah, blah. As soon as he's able to cry about that and break with the cult rules in which he will be humiliated. He's in a chauvinistic paradigm, not surprisingly, because good selling books present characters that remind us of ourselves. So why do we care so much about Harry? Because we're fucked from birth as well. Then we're fucked at school. Then we're fucked in the culture. Then we're given impossible rules where if we play by all the rules, we lose. And if we do really important things, we're breaking rules. And then, people believe the gossip over the this. And, oh my gosh, another person like me who's in a chauvinistic, fucked up paradigm that I can relate to because I'm in a chauvinistic, fucked up paradigm. Oh, I want to read what happens to this because I want to see what happens to me. And so, if you're trying to make, a widely empathized with story, i.e. people will keep turning the page because they have feelings about the pages, you've got to make the feelings in the characters have something to do with you, which means that if you're in a fucked up paradigm and can't get out of it, you got to make all the paradigms in your narrative somehow, oh, very interesting, wizards and magic, but they're in the same fucked up chauvinistic paradigm. So the sophistication of distinctions correlates to language. That's what a distinction is. Pinky, you see? Hand, pretty simple. Pinky, divides the hand into 5 different units, distinctions. So it's more useful. If you say the ring is on my pinky versus the ring is on my hand, if you're blind, it'll help you navigate to the right area faster, which means energy efficiency. If you say, GPS coordinates within 2 inches, you're going to waste way less time than GPS coordinates within 1 mile. Can you imagine trying to navigate someplace on GPSs that were close to within a mile? You get to the general area and you spend 3 hours driving around, then you stumble across the thing. No, because we're dealing with distinctions. If you use increments of miles, it's very hard. If you use increments of quarter miles, it's much easier. If you use increments of feet, it's easier. If you use increments of inches, you can't miss it. If your phone will guide you within a millimeter, how could you lose something if the distinction is that sophisticated? And so our technology is not that sophisticated, except for military grade stuff that we really invest on. But you can see the correlation between sophistication, language, distinction. A millimeter is a tinier distinction than a kilometer. 1,000 meters versus 1,000th of a meter. It's huge in efficiency. So language equals consciousness, because you have never had a thought in your life except in words. Yes, I did. What was it? Well, it was this and this and this. Those are words. You've never had a thought in your life that wasn't framed in words, which means language equals consciousness. Consciousness versus what? Versus unconscious unconsciousness and versus taboo. You see, one of the reasons that taboo is such an important metric for understanding the faults in a system is that which is taboo cannot be talked about, which means it's dangerous to think about, which means that you don't, which means that which is taboo is unconscious, which means you bang into it. So a system creates a bunch of objects within the system and then makes the objects unconscious because they're taboo. And they're taboo because they're taboo because they're taboo. There's no intelligent reason. If we had an intelligent culture, every person who experienced pedophilic-like tendencies would say, why am I experiencing pedophilic tendencies? I just looked at a 6-year-old and I'm more interested in a 6-year-old than I am in my wife, than a 30-year-old. Why? How does that work? Well, how it works in our cult is you are immediately banished from love and belonging, survival and security. Maybe put in jail, maybe banished, this and that. You're an immediate suspect. Now, the truth is, the fact that you've brought consciousness on it makes you safer, because now you have a distinction between thinking and doing, which you don't have if you can't talk and can't think. Then there's no distinction between thinking and doing, because you can't talk about it, so it builds up as an energy. And then you just discover, why did I do that? And you can't talk about that either, so you do it again. You can't talk about that, because that's really bad, and so you do it again. Because the system is producing an energy pattern that cannot be talked about, which creates unconsciousness, which means bumping into it in a denser form, because the whole point of consciousness is to adjust things at the level of thought that are bad design. If you're a designer and you're paying attention and you say, I think that fuel gauge up there is a little bit too small. You say you want 300 gallons of gas an hour to be pumped through there. Now the gauge is 2 millimeters. You're not going to get 300 gallons of gallon to come through 3 millimeters. Now, then we come to the dark side of Jobs, because this couldn't be talked about at Apple either. No. So they have to lie and go behind his back and fix the mistakes that couldn't be talked about. Because when the God, when the deity, the whatever, is never wrong. When Dad is never wrong, it doesn't mean he's never wrong. He's wrong all the time. It just means no one can talk about it, which means that they can't be aware of it, so they can't catch it, they can't mediate it. It's a very, very problematic thing to deal with, which is why shame is such a big deal. Why can't Dad be wrong? Well, because in his family system, being wrong meant you weren't lovable and didn't belong. So if you wanted to be part of this family, you don't make mistakes. Well, he needs to survive and feel secure. Him belonging to that family is one of the best survival strategies he's got. He's in a fucked up shame system in which mistakes are unacceptable and unforgivable. And so he can't make a mistake in language because that means he's unlovable and he won't belong. That means he's ashamed and the system will fall apart and his survival will fall apart. So he can't make mistakes. And he's 5 times bigger than the kids and has all the power and the money and stuff, so he can manipulate them into his version of reality in which mistakes don't happen. That's a faulty system. Everyone makes mistakes. And so if you have a system where you can't make mistakes or you get thrown out, then what really gets hidden is the mistakes that are made all the time unconsciously, and they cause way more impact in dense physical form than they would if they could be talked about. If they could be talked about, they do way less damage. But in a system where shame is linked to love and belonging, which is an innate human need, you can't talk about it when mistakes are shameful. Well, that gets back to the protocols and the rules. Some people live in systems where the rule is you can't make mistakes. That is a system of secrecy and denial and shame. In a system where you're expected to make mistakes and talk about them all, and we all learn and grow from them, you've got higher levels of intelligence. So there's the shame dynamic. So the taboos in a system are generally designed to protect power structures and individuals in roles of power that are operating within a faulty system in which acknowledgement of the existence of the taboo would threaten their survival. And so rather than using their role to help the circle turn, they use their influence within the role to control information, block, attack, this, that, and the other, to make sure that nobody finds out that there's a 3 millimeter gas valve that's going to ruin a $200 million submarine because they don't make mistakes. And everyone knows that, so they don't question it because they get that look. Do you want to be thrown off this team? Do you want me as your enemy? Do you want me as your enemy? Me that hired you, do. Okay. 3 millimeters, go right ahead. In fact, what a great idea. Why don't we save money and make a 1 millimeter pump valve that will destroy the submarine even faster, you brilliant eminence. And so this is the metric with which we can evaluate the Harry Potter narrative. Protocols and rules, shame. Paradigms, like when we say it's all about the wizarding. Like, why is Dumbledore the greatest wizard ever what? Well, he beat Grindelwald in a duel. That's the metric. So the other so we're dealing with two chauvinists who know how to manipulate energy to outsmart and outmanipulate one another within a sociopathic paradigm, within a chauvinistic paradigm in which feelings minimized, certainly not educated. And so he beat Grindelwald. So he's the greatest wizard. The United States dropped a nuclear bomb on Japan, the greatest, the superpower. The superpower. The paradigm where your ability to kill the most people is your metric of social rank. Well, that's a sociopathic ranking system as a paradigm. Because if we defined power as the ability to create human well-being per unit of energy invested, then we'd have to say it's a really mixed bag. The United States. It's a really mixed bag in Hogwarts because we love Harry Potter because he endured and suffered the stupidity of his family. He endured and suffered the stupidity of the wizarding world. He endured and suffered the stupidity of the Muggle culture, the stupidity of the other. He did his best to keep all the rules, but broke them for a noble cause. He endured all of his shame without killing too many people. He was ostracized and punished repeatedly for doing the right thing. He wasn't believed. He did this. And we all know that feeling. And he didn't always put power first. In that sense, he's a transcendent force in the paradigm. Because, of course, Ron, when he had the wizard, the wand that said, the Elder Wand, when he had the invisibility cloak, etc., and he one of the other important metrics in a system is the symmetry of power. I talked about the symmetry of ownership. It correlates. The symmetry of responsibility, the ability and willingness to respond, the symmetry of ownership, if it's happening in my world, I'm part of it. By allowing it and doing nothing, by causing it, by not doing more, by not organizing, I'm part of that. That's part of me. So that's part of power. Power, the ability to act. If you have the ability to act, what greater power is that? The ability to create what it is that you want. I have the ability to make billions. It's a power, an ability to act, and have that action be technologically sophisticated enough that the energy I direct actually produces the result that I want. So we're dealing with a transcendent moment in that state where he doesn't want the power, he wants friends. Now that's truly the most transcendent thing about it, because if you can imagine Bush or Trump or Clinton choosing friends over winning the election, over dominating, over being at the top, then you're in a world that is more transcendent than the world that we're in, because it's quite the opposite. People throw away friendships. They cost people's lives. They kill people. They lie. They do this, etc., to get to the top. And that's the general cult of the Harry Potter world, in which, if Ron Weasley got the Elder Wand, he'd have become a dictator. Why? You could use it for this and this and this and this. It's the transcendent moment in The Lord of the Rings. Don't tempt me. I would be tempted to use it for good. What? Concentrated authority, concentrated power. So that's part of the efficiency. It's part of like a wheel. A wheel has equal spokes going all the way around, so it turns symmetrically. When you concentrate weight, mass of any kind in one part of the wheel, it's hard to turn it away, and then it comes back and it comes back and it comes back. But it's not. You don't have a graceful turn. That's why you go to a wheel balancer and they move little lead weights, because if you have a totally balanced wheel, your engine will use less energy. You'll be more intelligent. And so in that sense, the symmetry of ownership correlates with the symmetry of responsibility, correlates with the symmetry of power. So concentrated power, less energy efficient as a design. That's why the Soviet Union and Chinese economies collapsed, with the primary emphasis on a centralized economy. It's always less efficient than a decentralized free market system. The same is true with power, in love, and when every member of a family, based on competency, has an important voice, versus I'm the breadwinner, it's this or else. There you have asymmetry, and you have a lot more misery. So these children, in many ways, transcend the system. But it's worth noting because one of the things that goes on in every system is that certain people in certain roles are deified. John F. Kennedy, Albus Dumbledore. But this misses the point in system design. Because one of the things that system design reveals is that everyone plays a part in the underlying statistics created by the system. So if you think of the Vegas system, they've structured the system so that the house always wins in the end. And that's a system. And everyone knows that. And everyone participates in that system. So how do they participate? Well, the government grants a license to casinos to take large sums of money from people, knowing that that's exactly what will happen. And what goes on in that? Because there's a lot of gambling addiction. There's a lot of trauma management that goes on into gambling addiction, etc. So who says that? Well, therapists are part of that. When I call therapists and say, I want you to be in a documentary about addiction and sexual abuse and trauma, they don't like it. They like talking about that. No. They like their clients to talk about it and pay them for it. They don't want to talk about it in public view, and certainly not for free in a documentary. So they're part of that system. So we are a traumatically illiterate culture. How do we get that way? Well, for one thing, when therapists define one of their greatest assets, and this is where you divide something, when therapists define one of their greatest assets as confidentiality, another way of saying that is secrecy. And another way of saying that is you can pay me money and nobody will know what's going on in your life except me, who isn't part of your life. Well, it doesn't sound like such a benefit when we're in a shadow-adverse culture in which many people don't understand that our system spits out 1 in 7 substance addicts. So you have a group of 10 of your friends, 1 in 7 of them is a substance addict. Now, our culture spits out a lot of shame about addiction. And so, for all the substance addicts, 90% of them are hiding the addiction in some way. And that's why we're not responding to it. We're not gathering the data, because you go to a therapist and say, how many percentage of your clients have a cocaine addiction, have a rape addiction, this and that and the other. They say, oh, I can't tell you. I can't tell you. It would be betraying my client's confidentiality. We're going to maintain the taboo. And the cult's job is to produce lots of victims of all these different abuses, and then send them to us to make money listening to the abuses. And then our job is to not say anything so that the cult doesn't have to feel any strain on its system. Because one intelligent example, for example, if anyone was alarmed by the fact that a lot of traumatic abuse survivors are blowing their savings to get a cheap high from the trauma, guilt, shame, etc. they have about something. And they're punishing themselves because they believe they're bad because they're protecting an abuser that called abuse love, and they want to feel loved, and they've gotten confused in a cult that is emotionally illiterate. Well, maybe we should say, hey, let's require every person going into Vegas to do some traumatic work. Well, what would have to happen? Therapists would have to actually speak out, at least about metadata. They don't have to reveal individual patient. Therapists can band together and put an aggregate. 15, 20 therapists can create a statistic. 42% of my patients have this, 22% have this, 38% have this and this and this. These are good aggregates for these numbers. And of the people, going into Vegas or whatever, this is the number of this. Is it good for the economy? It's hard to say. We export addiction, and so we have guilty Japanese flying in and spending millions and paying for the casinos and stuff like that. So what's the metric? But if it's all about making money, it's all in good fun, right? It's all in good fun. Billions of dollars come into the casinos, and we try and give people a good time, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're all participants in not protesting, in not talking with anyone that's going to Vegas about whether or not there's an underlying trauma, like what is it exactly that's underneath that, or looking at, we don't publish statistics that say for every 10 of my friends that go to Vegas, one of them comes back really hurt. And nobody knows about it because we don't gather the data. And everyone's fine because the casino people made a lot of money, and that's fine. And so the government is involved, the therapists are involved, the people that go to Vegas are involved, the architects that say, I'm fine building a $200 million casino. I love it. It's good for my career. So everyone involved has to say, yes, I'm okay with that. Or it doesn't happen. Just a few people can make it to say, no, I'm not going to allow this, if they care about it, if they own the issue. I think there's a statement that throughout history, it's been a very small, ragged band of individuals that have made the changes. They're the only people that ever have, because they decided not to allow. Rosa Parks said, enough already. I'm not moving to the back of the box. Well, a small change brings attention. She didn't allow that abuse to continue. Mandela didn't allow the absurdity of apartheid to continue, but so many countries and cultures, etc., did. Now, in Harry's world, some of the interesting change and choice points that get overlooked when some roles get deified and some don't. And this is one sign of a dysfunctional system. When you have a dysfunctional system that's producing massive amounts of suffering, and you don't analyze the allowing and causative forces of every role, but instead divide it into good and bad characters, this was a good character, that's a bad character, then you don't think about the fact that Albus Dumbledore was psychologically and emotionally illiterate. How is it that the greatest wizard of all time is emotionally and psychologically and traumatically illiterate? Well, it's perfectly obvious. It was created by an author in an emotionally, traumatically, psychologically illiterate culture. Perfectly normal, would be to be expected. But why is it okay? Because here's one narrative with the whole drama, which centers, is first of all, you have to understand that the Harry Potter's circle system created a Voldemort. Our circle created a Hitler, a Stalin, a Bush, a this, a Trump. Our system also creates people that are so unhappy and so illiterate and so shame-based that they massacre millions of people, and we participate in them. It's not like, oh, it's them. No, we cause and allow these dynamics. You see, no one in the United States, none of the Christians, the Pope, none of them rushed into Germany and said, these guys are eating leather. There's a little boy, Hitler, growing up feeling completely inadequate, crushed here. Nobody cared about that. Why not? Because we're psychologically and emotionally illiterate. We're traumatically illiterate. We don't somehow get, after thousands of years of watching the same cycle, we don't get that if you do what we did to Iraq, go in, top-heavy, bully, murder, cause PTSD, cause Abu Ghraib, and then leave 10 years later. We don't seem to get the idea that we've caused PTSD to over 1 million Iraqis. And we don't know the statistics. When you cause shameful PTSD through an invasive violation, you create incredible amounts of trauma, fight, flight, freeze. So a statistically noticeable number of those young men who watch their grandmothers being bombed by this and that and the other, a statistically noticeable number want to have revenge. We don't understand the psychology, that's obvious and inevitable, which is why all of the independent analysis said that we have created more terrorists in the war on terror than have existed in hundreds of years. Our war on terror has terrified and traumatized so many people around the world that we have flooded the terrorist recruitment banks who have new evidence of exactly why America needs to be destroyed. We are so dumb. We are so committed to willful ignorance that we don't read the Greek stories. We don't listen to the saga of the big dominating and being. We don't pay attention because we're chauvinistic. Because we'd have to honor the feminine. We'd have to honor the full psyche, emotions, psychology, the inner world. We'd have to acknowledge that when we cut the world into yin and yang, that yin is as much an important subject to study, to respect, to honor as yang. We don't want to do it, so we don't. So we create world wars and kill millions of people. That's what you and I do when we say it's just fine that mom stays psychologically illiterate and has another kid that's going to grow up with PTSD. My neighbor who's drunk and does this decide to get pregnant. It's not my problem. Maybe the next Hitler, but not my problem. When we don't own the probability fields that a protocol creates, because we're scared, because in our paradigm the line is different. That's their baby. This is my baby. Now, I will not abuse my baby, but that's their baby. Now, their baby will be given PTSD and taught to be an addict and go around raping and killing and being pedophilic, and that will be their baby. That's not me. No. I'm not protesting it at City Hall. I'm not writing a new law. I'm not demanding that my kids learn traumatic literacy in grade school and high school. I'm not running for office. I'm not sending pamphlets. I'm not doing any of that because it's not my problem. That's why intelligence is correlated with symmetry of ownership. Symmetry of ownership doesn't say that's there and this is here. Symmetry of ownership says I'm part of a system. It's dysfunctional. It's not going to get any more functional unless a small group of people do something about it. And it's always a small group of people because the majority is always abiding by cult dogma. That's that. This is this. That's not that. This is this. I'm going to follow the line of the cult. That's not my problem. So it continues until it is our problem because it's a lie. The underlying physics of reality says that we are connected biologically, emotionally, psychically, mentally, financially. We are connected. And no scientist can make a case of that dissociation. Cults do that. The cult of America, the cult of Britain, the cult of Japan, cults do that. A scientist can't do it. Just try and dissect where you're different from the parents that gave birth to you, how you had nothing to do with your parents, except that if they didn't exist as they were, you wouldn't exist. And if their parents didn't exist, you can follow it all the way back to the first 100,000 people. And if a few of those didn't exist, your whole billion didn't exist either. Well, it doesn't sound very disconnected. Oh, and I'm this separate body. Try cutting off your connection with the trees. Just hold your breath and see how long you can last without the trees that are all around you. A couple of minutes, good for you. You can maintain the delusion for 3 minutes. Then you're dead if you're committed to that sociopathic dogma. Drinking, eating, how well do you function without the electrical system, the financial system? It's endlessly connected. What about the law of gravity? You don't need that, right? I'm an individual. Law of gravity, no big deal. It connects you to the edge of the multiverse, which has the same law of gravity over there, applied differently, but the same underlying physics. It's over there. It's over here. Someone owns and changes the law of gravity at the nth degree of the multiverse. Suddenly, you're all floating off and dead. It's pretty connected. So, the question is, why did Dumbledore recruit a boy in a traumatized, abused state and give him no emotional education? We're looking at, why does Hogwarts and that whole world create Voldemort? Because what Hogwarts did, very similar to what our military does, is it takes young boys who have abandoned fathers, who feel shame and worthless, who feel immense hatred towards themselves, having internalized all of the shame of the dysfunction around them, and that have learned one thing, that you cannot have real love and belonging in this world. So you've got to secure your survival with dominance over other people because love doesn't work. Every abandoned boy knows that love doesn't work. If it did, he'd still have a dad who cared about him as a human being. Well, that didn't work. Now, if you go to such a boy and say, you seem like just the right sociopathic type to be good at killing people, we're going to use your self-hatred, your sociopathic tendencies to train you into being a killing machine. Not for us, because we've divided the world in half. No, you're going to kill other people. And that's fine. Killing us, oh, don't do that. Other people, that's fine. Okay, got that? Right. All right. The problem is the underlying symmetry of the conscious mind. The conscious mind cannot quite figure out at a deep level why it is that this mass of energy that looks like a human being should be tormented, killed, lied to, betrayed, and blah, 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 blah. And then you go over a country line that was invented in the last 300 years. And then these human beings that look just the same and feel just the same shouldn't be killed. And so at a very deep level, we know that all human beings are equal. They are from the principle of physics. It's only the cult superficial dogma that tries to keep this partition. So when we train someone to be inhuman, we are breeding people who will eventually turn that inhumanity on themselves and their family and their country. That's how you breed inhuman people. And even the Celts, even the Norse men, had rituals of re-engagement with their feminine self after war to transition out of sociopathic states into empathic states, back into the feminine. Even they, those barbarians, did it better than we do it. We bring our men back in PTSD and they beat the shit out of their kids. Their kids grow up in deep self-hatred, bully everyone else around them, and then we blame the bully. But we don't protect the bully from being bullied, psychologically or physically. And it's not my problem because it's not my kid. Why should I, an accountant in a civilized part of the country, be worried about what's going on in some poor slum by someone that returned from Vietnam or Iraq, where they learned to be a murderer, and then have just been unleashed on their children, and their bodies can't tell the difference, even though their mind is saying, I should be being nice to my son, and I should be killing these other kids over there because they might be carrying a bomb. I shot a 7-year-old girl with a lunch pail because she might have been carrying a bomb. But my boy, I'm supposed to have tendered it. It just doesn't make sense. And so much of this deteriorates to the lowest common denominator rather than the highest common denominator. And then, how does this happen? In a psychologically, traumatically, and emotionally illiterate cult, you have no idea with that level of willful blindness. How does Dumbledore recruit a traumatized, sadistic, and abused boy and say, I know what you need. You need lots of magic spells to amplify your sadistic trauma. You hate yourself. You know, I can see it in your eyes, you like to hurt people. I see, but I'm a blithering idiot. I'm only the greatest wizard of my time. I don't send you to therapy. I don't tell you what you need is a nurturing mother who will die to protect you, and you need to know that there are human beings that are muggles who will do that for you better than any wizarding family. That's what you need for medicine, to cure the chauvinism that says that wizards are better because they have more power. Just a deeper version of any military thinking. The nuclear bomb is better than the machine gun is better than the revolver because you can kill more people. So you need to learn that our world is fucked up in the wizarding community. And it doesn't know that human love, wizard or otherwise, is the only thing that can cure a sociopathic state. And that you need to be seen for who you are, carrying the disease of a fucked up cult, a disease of your father. It's not yours. You're not a bad person. Your desire to hurt people is your desire to hurt yourself, internalizing the desire of your family for you to die because you were an unwanted child in an unsophisticated cult where a woman abused by another fucked up wizarding family, only chance of love was spurned, and she didn't even learn what real love was. Because in a chauvinistic cult, you don't learn what real love is. You don't learn that love is the wishing for the other person's happiness. You learn that it's enslavement. Why? Because she's enslaved in a fucked up wizarding cult. Kicked around because she's a woman. Her needs for empathy and her feminine side completely decimated, leading to exaggerated coping mechanisms of possessiveness and need and misuse of magic. You were taught by complete fuck-ups. A fucked up mother in a fucked up culture, in a fucked up cult that didn't teach any of you how to love a child in a transcendent way. And what? You're going to learn magic and suddenly be a great human being? Dumbledore. Hey, read any books lately? Anyone? Greeks? Romans? Read anything lately? You fucked up idiot. You see, the point here, it's not to knock Dumbledore. This is just a story. Just like our story. It's not to knock Trump. It's just a story with different roles, with energy coming in going through the paradigms, the systems, etc. Everyone, it's not me, it's not getting confused in this system. And it spits out a statistical output of massive amounts of unnecessary suffering that will continue until we are emotionally literate, psychologically literate, relationally illiterate, traumatically illiterate. It's a different system. The biology of trauma, it's a different system. And it's not going to change as long as Dumbledore is deified, or Trump is deified, or Obama is deified. Like, oh, he had nothing to do with it. The hero who just recruits terrorists, who manufactures terror, and then fights it nobly. You see, that's ultimately the story of so many abusive parents. They abuse their children. They disown the abuse. They disown their dysfunctionality. They shame the child for the abuse and convince the child that they deserve it, and that's why they've got it, because they're unlovable. All of that is a lie. All of it is abuse. Having convinced the child that they are unlovable, they then blame the inability of the parent to love onto the child's unlovability. The child seeks integrity with this delusion and starts to behave unlovably, simply in ways that our cult doesn't know how to love. It doesn't know how to diagnose. It doesn't know how to respond. A somatic therapist, rather than an Albus Dumbledore, would have called Albus Dumbledore's behavior abuse and would have said that Albus Dumbledore, single-handedly, with his emotional illiteracy, divided the Muggle and the Wizarding world, caused countless thousands of deaths, set loose the Dementors, etc., by taking a traumatized child in a sociopathic reptilian brain state induced by systemic childhood abuse and on giving him magical powers, and by not helping the teachers distinguish between human goodness and wizardry. Who was the teacher who taught him about Horcruxes? What? Another teacher who made Dumbledore's mistake, that wizarding magic is more important than human love. So Harry Potter redeems that in a way that Dumbledore wouldn't, but not necessarily. You see, it's kept rather fuzzy because we don't get this as a cult. We don't get the fact that what Dumbledore did was guaranteed on a statistical level to create a Voldemort. May not have been that one. Voldemort went around the country recruiting hundreds of wizarding children, maybe thousands over his career. It just takes one Hitler. One kid in a sociopathic state given enormous power and unleashed without emotional literacy. The system is the thing going on here, whether in the Muggle system or the Wizarding system. Not an ounce of emotional literacy, not an ounce of psychological literacy, not an ounce of mythology, which is another entrance into psychology. No transcendent experiences. There's no shamanic awakening in the Harry Potter movie where Voldemort could have a Kikian ritual they had in Greece, etc., and discover the world is an illusion and this and that and the other and all these things are here. Where was that for Voldemort? He was betrayed. He was set up to fail. And sure enough, once he had more power, the fear from flight moves to fight in the traumatic system, and he becomes the oppressor he was terrified of. But he never leaves the reptilian brainstem. He never gets to experience love. Voldemort is the most lonely member of the whole thing. He doesn't even know what love is, because from the time he was born, he was induced into the reptilian brainstem and stuck there by the incompetence of his parents, their culture, the wizarding culture, his teachers. And as people grew afraid of the qualities they were growing in him. You see, culture takes the infinite probability of the psyche and grows certain traits and suppresses others. That's what culture does. That's how you learn, what a substance is. When you create, for example, a tissue culture, it's designed to grow certain things and not others. Well, Hogwarts is designed to grow technological wizardry, which is a neutral force. And after 10,000 students, one of them is going to be a Voldemort. One of them is going to be a Hitler. One of them is going to be a Stalin. Blaming it all on Stalin, Hitler, Voldemort, etc., obscures the underlying mathematics that says that we're creating a system that guarantees that will happen, and then we're blaming the person that erupts. It's like sending 1,000 people to Vegas and then blaming the 98% for coming back broke. Why can't you be like these two? Because you sent me to a fucked up system. You told me to go there and make lots of money. I placed lots of bets. Somehow I always came out underneath. I don't know what it was. Maybe I'm an unlovable person. No, maybe you're in a fucked up system that creates bad statistics. Now, admittedly, one Hitler per 20 million, it's not that bad. There are worse systems than this. But there are systems that are easily 10 to 20 to 30 times better. 30 times. It just takes intelligence. Understanding what intelligence is. Intelligence is not knowing trivial pursuit. Intelligence is the efficiency with which you turn units of energy, time, money, and natural resources into human well-being. You start measuring that. You start measuring cultures. As I travel around the world, I measure cultures. How much energy does this culture spend? How happy are its people? Oh, plenty of places are far more intelligent than the United States. Data gathering. You got to measure data. Sexual abuse is rampant in this culture. How rampant? We don't gather the data. And then we don't teach it if we gather it. And then we don't teach the correlation or its impact. So we don't know the impact on the economy, the environment, etc. Symmetry of ownership, masculine and feminine balance. We should be learning 3 to 4 hours a day or in school about the inner world, about psychology, about feelings, about human relationships, about partnerships, and about business collaborations, and about ecological design. All of that is in feminine terrain. It's about people. It's about the heart. Sophistication of distinctions, developing new language, developing language that measures symmetry. Like if you're trying to repair a tire that isn't turning, well, look at this wheel. It's obvious. This bit is flat. This bit is pretty symmetrical. Once you diagnose that, you can work to round out the edge. Until you diagnose that, which requires measurement of relevant data, you have no idea what to do with that wheel. And that's one of the things that we're very good at in this cult is we create what's called garbage. Energy we don't know what to do with. So we throw it in a big hole and then extract more natural resources and make more stuff that we don't know what to do with that we throw in a big hole. You got to diagnose and repair the system. Everyone is always working to meet their human needs within the system that they have been given. The most dangerous part of our system is that it does not include a healthy scientific formula for measuring the intelligence and the health and the symmetry of our system, and for holding those in authority, be it parents, bosses, the masculine person in a relationship, male or female, doesn't matter, whoever's in the masculine role. The healthy masculine protects the feminine. inside and out. We don't learn that. We don't measure. Couples are not measuring how masculine versus how feminine each partner is, and whether the feminine in the relationship, in the man and in the woman, the feminine in the man and the feminine in the woman, if that's being treated well. My feminine side has been decimated in this culture since birth. My masculine side is treated very well as long as he doesn't interfere with that abuse dynamic. This isn't interference. This is my masculine saying this is full of shit and making an effort. So the cult's job is to silence and ignore all of this because this challenges the cult. And a cult has one underlying tenet: to maintain the status quo, to avoid the fear of the unknown. And the unknown is feminine. A cult's primary job is imposing often highly tyrannical order to protect ego consciousness from its fear and terror of the feminine in the form of chaos and the unknown. A traumatized culture is terrified of the unknown, i.e. the feminine, and chaos, i.e. the feminine, more than it is terrified of any other thing. And a cult is the cudgel that it uses to carve out turf within the vast complexity of the wheel and say, this is us, and that's not us, and we're not budging, and that's the way it's going to be, that's the way it's always been, and anyone who isn't with us is against us, and so that's just the way it is, and don't ask questions. I'm your parents, don't sass your father, don't question the government, do what you're told, blah, 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 and we'll all escape that dreaded thing of avoiding our terror of the feminine range in the psyche, our terror of the unknown, the terror of chaos. Not having the sophistication yet to understand that within the unknown is every miracle, every technology, every beautiful future that we've ever wanted to have and watched turn to dust. That's in the unknown, how to do that. That within the chaos is the chaos of every possibility, both dark and light. And that chaos and the unknown is not the enemy. The ignorance of our technology to navigate chaos and navigate the unknown and end up in the beautiful unknown and in the luminous possibility that is beyond the limited framework of an ego consciousness to figure out. That's what we murder when we turn our back and say, no, this is the way it is because this is the way it is, because this is the way it is, and I'm sticking to it.